The murky light streaming through the blinds did little to smooth the sharp edges of the morning in Port Charles, a morning that promised nothing short of turmoil for its citizens, as Soaps.com's fresh General Hospital spoilers for Monday, June 16th, to Friday, June 20th clearly said. Gio, who was normally the epitome of teenage insouciance, found himself pushed against a wall by a talk he never wanted to hear, a discovery that would definitely hurt him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. He'd stepped into the coffee shop expecting to have a quick latte before heading to the gym, but the hushed, anxious whispers from the rear booth attracted his attention. His Aunt Lois spoke in a low, hurried mutter, punctuated by his cousin Brooklyn's more measured, but equally strained tones. They were talking about him, specifically his origins, which he had always assumed were settled thanks to family legend and old images. The words adoption and secret cut through the commonplace clatter of mugs and the hiss of the espresso machine, striking him with the power of a physical blow. He froze, a chill creeping into his bones, the latte forgotten. He knew he shouldn't listen, that eavesdropping was a crime, but a fundamental, irrepressible want to comprehend pressed against him. He heard fragments of a past he didn't know existed, of a mother he'd never met, of a father whose identity remained unknown, and of a truth that had been purposefully and methodically hidden from him for years. Lois had been describing how difficult it had been for her to keep it quiet all these years, especially from him. Brooklyn, ever the pragmatist, contended that it was for the best, that Gio had a stable, loving family, and that disclosing it sooner would have done more harm than good. But now Lois was expressing deep shame, implying that the truth was long overdue, and that he deserved to know, even if it wrecked their carefully built family narrative. "He's old enough now, Brooklyn," Lois said softly, her voice shaking with sorrow. "He deserves to understand who he is and where he came from. Every birthday, every holiday, every time he asked about my sister, I felt like a liar." The word liar struck a deep chord with Gio. The betrayal left a harsh taste on his tongue, far stronger than any coffee. He felt profoundly disoriented, as if the ground beneath him had abruptly moved, disclosing an abyss. His identity, his fundamental base, seemed like a meticulously crafted falsehood. How could his family, the people he loved and trusted the most, have maintained such a huge secret? The earful was more than simply a random overheard remark. It was the systematic destruction of his world. He experienced a swirling maelstrom of rage, uncertainty, and a profound, aching loneliness. The casual comfort with which he had maneuvered his life just moments before had vanished, replaced with a raw, exposed fragility. He grasped the counter, his knuckles white, and a silent scream rose in his breast. He had to address them, but first he wanted to breathe and figure out how he was meant to pick up the pieces of a life he now realized he understood very little about. This wasn't just about his parents, it was about every shared laugh, every soothing remark, and every moment of assumed intimacy that had suddenly been contaminated by a monumental omission. The weight of the secret, which had become his burden, crushed down and suffocated him. He wondered what more they hadn't told him, what other fundamental lies supported his existence. The gym, his buddies, his goals for the day, all seemed insignificant. The truth was all that mattered now, no matter how painful it was. He anticipated the questions that would bother him. Did his birth mother think of him? Did his birth father know about his existence? How different would his life have been if this reality had been disclosed years earlier? The safe world he had always known felt frail, resting on a rickety foundation of carefully suppressed facts. The implicit faith he had placed in his family had cracked, leaving him feeling completely alone in a busy setting. Across town, in the sterile yet familiar walls of General Hospital, Elizabeth Weber had a light bulb moment, a flash of understanding that revealed a road forward where before only muddy confusion existed. She'd been studying a complicated medical report for an older woman with a bizarre set of symptoms that resisted straightforward diagnosis. Hours had been spent poring over medical data, talking with colleagues, and executing innumerable tests, all of which resulted in dead ends. Elizabeth, who is generally analytical and logical, had become increasingly frustrated, a knot of tightness tightening in her gut. Mrs. Eleanor Vance arrived with occasional periods of disorientation, an unusual stride, and an intermittent tremor in her left hand. The initial scans were clear, the blood work was normal, and the neurological examination was inconclusive. Every specialist had proposed a different idea, none of which adequately explained the constellation of symptoms. Elizabeth had spent her lunch break and evening looking over obscure medical publications, feeling a familiar buzz of resolve that only erupted when confronted with a true medical enigma. Then, as she stared at a seemingly innocuous line in the patient's history, a brief mention of a childhood illness, a severe, prolonged bout of undiagnosed fever and rash at age 5, easily overlooked because it appeared to have resolved without complications, a forgotten nursing school lecture, a specific case study about a rare, delayed neurological sequela of a common childhood virus, clicked into place. It wasn't the sickness itself, but its rare, lingering neurological repercussions, a condition so uncommon that it was frequently overlooked in first diagnoses. The scattered and seemingly unrelated elements came together unexpectedly to form a coherent picture. A silent gasp escaped her lips, and she grabbed a pen, frantically scribbling notes. Post-infectious encephalomyelitis atypical presentation? Check CSF for specific markers. Consider specialized MRI sequence. Her mind raced, connecting the dots and visualizing the inflammatory process she suspected was at work. This wasn't just a diagnosis. It was the diagnosis which explained everything, from the patient's modest tremors to her extraordinary cognitive deterioration, and even the minor alterations in her speech that had previously been rejected as age-related. It was an unusual disease that few doctors would immediately explore, but Elizabeth, aided by this unexpected realization, saw it as clearly as day. Her lightbulb moment was more than just solving a medical puzzle. It was a profound reinforcement of her own intuition, years of expertise, and natural ability to integrate unrelated information. It was a monument to her determination and reluctance to give up when faced with a difficulty. This discovery awakened something deeper within Elizabeth. In addition to providing instant relief to her patient, and allowing her to push for specialized therapy. For far too long she had felt disoriented, her personal life a tangled web of romantic difficulties, family strife, and lingering anguish over earlier losses. Her professional confidence, while always present, had occasionally been overwhelmed by the constant emotional currents that surrounded her. This moment, this pure, unadulterated victory of intellect and humanity, reminded her of her essential identity, a brilliant, caring nurse capable of great insight and unshakable focus. It was a jolt of self-awareness, a reaffirmation of her purpose, and a sense of quiet power she hadn't felt in a while. This insight went beyond the medical, quietly influencing her perspective on her own complicated relationships. If she could see through the layers of symptoms to reveal a patient's underlying truth, she might be able to apply the same discerning eye to her own life, to the whispered truths and intricate dynamics that had held her in a condition of constant limbo. The lamp did more than just enlighten the patient's chart. It cast a fresh light on Elizabeth's entire universe, hinting at solutions to her own intractable difficulties, and instilling a calm desire to pursue clarity and truth in all aspects of her life. She had a surge of energy and a renewed sense of agency. This newfound inner clarity inspired her, implying that the answers to her personal quandaries might lie not in external fixes, but in her own steadfast search of truth, as she did with Mrs. Vance's baffling symptoms. Meanwhile, the pleasant facade of domestic bliss that Curtis Ashford and Portia Robinson had painstakingly built around their marriage was suddenly shattered. Curtis served Portia their marriage on the rocks, and not with a soft touch. The specific trigger was the long-held, creeping secret of Trina's paternity, which had hung between them like an invisible, suffocating cloak for far too long. Curtis, a man who valued honesty and transparency above all else, had hit a breaking point. He'd attempted to understand Portia's concern and desire to protect Trina, but the constant lying had destroyed the fundamental foundation of their trust. The faint whispers, knowing glances, and even stinging comments from people in Port Charles who appeared to be aware of a deeper secret, had all eroded his peace of mind. He had addressed Portia numerous times, softly at first, then with increasing intensity, urging her to be completely honest with him, to trust him with the entire truth, whatever it was. Each time she had avoided, reasoned, or promised to inform him when the time was right, which never seemed to come. It happened late one evening, following another tense meal in which every topic felt like a minefield and every harmless question was a possible tripwire. The stillness was thick with unspoken words, a palpable weight between them. Curtis, his voice low and devoid of warmth, gazed at Portia across the beautiful dining table, the flickering candlelight doing little to soften his grim determination. He had just finished receiving a text message from Jordan, a seemingly benign update on a case that served as a stark reminder of the nature of secrets and their inevitable unraveling. "I can't do this anymore, Portia," he murmured, his words piercing the silence like a dagger. "This perpetual walking on eggshells, this shadow of a lie hovering over us. It's killing us, killing me." Portia flinched, her normally composed demeanor breaking. Her eyes widened, a desperate horror flashing through them. She had anticipated and dreaded this, but the harsh finality of his tone still surprised her. She tried to interject, to plead, to explain her reasons, her anxieties, and the apparent protection of Trina's mental state, but Curtis raised his hand, his stare steadfast, his jaw rigid. "Let me finish. I adore you, Portia, more than anything. But love is insufficient when there is no trust. When I look at you, I don't see my wife. I see someone who chose to conceal a fundamental truth from me, someone who actively maintained a lie for years, even after we promised our lives to each other. And with each passing day that deception grows heavier, and our marriage weaker, more brittle." He did not mention divorce right away, but rather a separation, a forced reckoning with the broken trust. He suggested they live apart to give them both time to deal with the damage, to determine if there was any salvageable ground remaining, or if the fissures were too deep to repair. Portia's eyes welled up with tears, a frantic sob sticking in her throat, her hands trembling as she stretched across the table, only for Curtis to gently draw back. She understood. This was not a threat. It was a lament, a sorrowful admission that their once promising relationship had been poisoned by her secrets. The pebbles were more than simply symbolic. They represented the sharp edges of broken trust, tearing at the fabric of their shared lives. Curtis, despite his suffering, felt this was the only option. He couldn't keep living in a marriage constructed on shifting sands, where every base felt unstable. The weight of his decision was enormous, but the alternative, a gradual, excruciating death of their love, hollowed out by deception, was intolerable. The silence that followed his declaration was deafening, punctuated only by Portia's slow weeping, a stark, melancholy elegy for a love on the verge of an irreversible fall. This was not a moment of rage, but of tremendous anguish and the terrible honesty of a man pushed to his limits, seeking a desperate measure to preserve what may already be lost. Through her sobs, Portia attempted to find the words, any words, to bridge the abyss that had suddenly opened between them, but her voice failed. All she could offer was a wordless, desperate appeal, her heart bleeding with the understanding that her darkest fears had come true, not from the secret itself, but from its slow, torturous unveiling and the ensuing corrosion of the trust that linked her to Curtis. She saw the sorrow in his eyes reflecting her own, a shared torment caused by a secret that had now exacted its harsh price. Meanwhile, Michael Corinthos and Sasha Gilmore had a talk that was honest, unfiltered, and from the heart, in stark contrast to the often performance-based encounters that defined their public lives. They met at the Coeur d'Alene Boathouse, a place steeped in shared history, both joyful and painful. Sasha had sought him out, feeling an undeniable pull, a yearning for closure, or perhaps something more. She had been fighting with her own issues, especially since the news of his custody victory, and she needed to clear the air, not just for him but also for herself. Michael, first defensive since his recent conflicts had left him exhausted, quickly shed his guard, realizing the genuine vulnerability in her gaze. The air between them was thick with unspoken regrets and lingering feelings, a phantom of the strong connection they once had. They discussed the past, the strength of their connection, and the dreams they used to share before life's terrible twists and turns separated them. Sasha recounted the depths of her troubles, the never-ending pain of losing their kid, Liam, and the dark grip of addiction that had nearly engulfed her in the aftermath, with a rare honesty that showed through her normal guardedness. She spoke of her enormous loss and self-loathing, and how Michael's unwavering compassion, his persistent, gentle concern even after their breakup, had frequently served as a silent anchor, a reminder of the decent person she was attempting to be again. "Even when I was at my worst, Michael," she admitted, her voice soft, "you never judged me. You always saw something in me worth fighting for, even when I couldn't see it myself." Michael, in turn, spoke of his own feelings of helplessness during her darkest times, His profound regret that he couldn't have saved her from her demons, and the complex emotions that still stirred within him whenever he saw her. He accepted the arduous path they'd taken, the choices that had led to their separation, and the awful hand fate had given them. This wasn't about rekindling a relationship, at least not right away, but about appreciating the huge impact they'd had on one another's lives, the permanent imprint they'd left. There was no blaming or resentment, only a common knowledge of their interwoven histories and the scars they each bore. Sasha conveyed her joy for him in Willow, which felt unexpectedly real, free of any lingering anger or competitive attitude. She described seeing him with Wiley and seeing the dedicated father he had become, and how it filled her with quiet pleasure to know he was the type of man she had always imagined him to be. Michael stated that despite everything, a part of him will always feel strongly for her, a link formed through shared suffering, budding love, and genuine respect. He expressed his desire for a happy co-parenting future with Willow, one in which Wiley and Amelia could grow without fear of confrontation. They discussed Michael's new daughter, Daisy, and Sasha added, in a low melancholy tone, that she hoped he found true happiness, the stable, loving family he deserved. The conversation was therapeutic, a release of unspoken words and hidden feelings, a compassionate conclusion to a terrible chapter. It was a recognition that, even if their paths had separated, their mutual respect and regard had endured through time and experience. Speaking from the heart helped them to release the hidden burdens of their past, leaving them both with a sense of serenity and a quiet awareness that certain connections, no matter how they alter, never truly end. It was a moving moment of adult acceptance, a rarity in the volatile world of Port Charles, where ancient emotions were frequently renewed with destructive intensity. But this time things were different. This was about healing, about finding a way to honor the past without being trapped by it, and about really wishing each other well, which was a modest triumph in and of itself, a monument to the eternal human ability for growth and understanding even in the most terrible of circumstances. Willow Tate was on the verge of making a decision. The weight of her decision pressed down on her with crushing force, each option offering a maze of implications. It had been a while since she made a wise decision, a chilling appraisal that struck a chord deep within her own worried heart. Her previous history was rife with mistakes, particularly those involving her connection with Drew, and the tragic custody struggle with Michael over Wiley and Amelia. According to the source, the judge just granted Michael full custody of both children. The present decision she was facing was momentous, possibly the most important in her life since her cancer diagnosis. The earful Gio received, unknown to Willow, may have intertwined with her own future, another secret ready to blow in Port Charles, but Willow was too preoccupied with her own crisis to notice the impending storm elsewhere. The options before her were stark. Should she defend Michael's recent custody victory with renewed zeal, possibly utilizing some new facts or tactic that Drew, her current partner and Michael's uncle, was continuously pushing? He had been adamant that they appeal, that Michael's triumph was a travesty, and that Willow was being unfairly punished. Drew, fueled by a simmering resentment toward Michael and possibly a lingering desire for vengeance against the Quartermaines, had presented her with stacks of legal documents outlining various arguments, even suggesting they expose Michael's own questionable dealings, a tactic Willow found increasingly repugnant. His argument was that they deserved the children, and Michael was using them as pawns. Or should she, for the first time in a long time, put her children's well-being ahead of her own wishes and the possibly manipulative influence of others, especially Drew, whose recent behavior had been questionable, bordering on vindictive? The custody battle had been harsh, leaving profound scars on all parties involved, particularly the children. Willow had, maybe unwisely, held on to the belief that the children belonged completely to her, a all-or-nothing philosophy that had alienated many, including the court. She had convinced herself that shared custody was insufficient, that Wiley and Amelia required her continual attention, and that any time apart from her would be harmful. This conviction, while sincerely held, could off as self-serving in court, especially when compared to Michael's willingness to compromise. Drew's dark change, his assertive and politically ambitious posture, combined with his contentious romance with Willow, only exacerbated issues, casting doubt on Willow's judgment in the eyes of many. He had threatened to damage the Quartermaine family tombs to spite Tracy, which Willow appeared to condone through her silence, undermining her moral standing and linking her with Drew's increasingly evil desires. The talk with Michael, while providing some emotional relief, also served as a vivid reminder of the stability and affection he provided for their children. He had honestly attempted to negotiate an amicable divorce for their sake, in stark contrast to Willow's future actions, which were spurred by Drew's influence. His calm, reasonable demeanor in court had made her emotional, often frantic, arguments appear less convincing. Her choice now was between continuing down the path of conflict, fueled by Drew's agendas and her own stubborn, increasingly fractured belief that she was the only suitable parent, and embracing a more collaborative co-parenting approach, even if it meant sacrificing her immediate desires and the image of herself as the primary indispensable caregiver. Willow anguished while pacing her living room, the gentle hum of the air conditioning doing little to calm her mind. She recounted every dispute, accusation, and piece of legal advice she had received. She thought about Wiley and Amelia, their innocent features, and their desire for peace and stability. She recalled the arguments, the stress, and the palpable strain that had pervaded their home during the custody battle, the way Wiley would shudder when she and Michael raised their voices, or Amelia would cling to her, sensing the underlying conflict. Was it worth inflicting additional mental turmoil on them? Was it worth the risk of long-term psychological harm to her children, who were caught in the crossfire of their parents' lengthy battle? Drew had been a persistent voice in her ear, his arguments persuasive in their certainty, urging her to fight, never give up, exercise her rights as their mother, and see Michael as a threat. He portrayed Michael as the villain, a manipulative force out for vengeance who is attempting to take her children away. Willow understood deep down that Michael was a decent father. She had witnessed his unwavering dedication, steady presence, and quiet strength. She remembered Michael painstakingly teaching Wiley to ride his bike, reading goodnight stories, and simply sitting with Amelia as she explored her surroundings. That was not the act of a man who intended to harm his children. Her internal turmoil was a battle between loyalty to Drew, who had been so supportive of her, especially throughout her illness, and a growing uneasy knowledge that his guidance, particularly recently, might not be in the best interests of the children. His attention, which had once been comfortable, now felt unnerving and almost possessive. There was also the gnawing anxiety of proving everyone correct, the naysayers who saw her as weak, gullible, and selfish, someone who had lost her moral compass. The comments on internet forums, the knowing glances from casual acquaintances, and the anxiety in Carly's eyes all confirmed that she was going off course. Was she genuinely becoming like Harmony, her biological mother, who had made so many stupid decisions fueled by selfish wants, leaving a path of ruin in her wake? The thought sent shivers down her spine, a deep anxiety of reliving the ancestral pain she had fled. The lightbulb moment Elizabeth had earlier, albeit unknown to Willow, reflected her own desperate need for clarity, a single instant of truth that would cut through the chaos. Willow longed for a moment of pure, irrefutable truth, a sign leading her in the correct direction, away from the chaos and toward actual serenity. The clock ticked loudly, each second increasing the pressure. She had a meeting booked, a final consultation that would determine her next moves. Her decision would determine whether she maintained the legal struggle, dragging her children through additional courtrooms and mental turmoil, or sought a peaceful resolution, no matter how difficult it was for her ego and her relationship with Drew. She thought about the ramifications of fighting and losing again. Not only would she suffer greatly emotionally, but so would Wiley and Amelia. Would it irreparably harm her relationship with Michael, making co-parenting impossible, resulting in an ongoing circle of animosity? And what about Drew? Would he support her if she chose a route of compromise, or would he see it as treachery and a show of her weakness? His recent behavior revealed a guy consumed by ambition and vengeance, in stark contrast to the wonderful, unselfish individual she once respected. She imagined his expression, the fervor in his eyes as he spoke of beating Michael, and a sickening thought dawned. Was he actually fighting for her and the children, or for his personal vendetta? A memory arose unexpectedly, unprompted by the current crisis. A tranquil afternoon with Wiley, creating a fort out of blankets in the living room, his infectious laughter booming throughout. She remembered Amelia's small hand holding her finger, and her pure trust. That laughter, that innocent delight was what counted. Not winning, not being right, but preserving that laughing and creating an environment in which her children could thrive, free from the shadow of their parents' disagreements. She remembered Michael's remarks from their heart-to-heart, his real wish for a peaceful co-parenting relationship, and his expressed hope for the children's sake. It had appeared impossible at the time, as they were in the midst of their ugly divorce, spurred by bitterness and external forces. However, after the tiredness of the argument and the harsh reality of the judge's decision, a new viewpoint began to develop. Could she overcome her pride, resentment, and external demands to actually act in the best interests of her children, even if it meant sacrificing her own immediate wishes for what she once thought was justice? This was the ultimate test of her character, an opportunity to reinvent herself not by her past sins, but by a future founded on true care and selfless love, a love that transcended the petty squabbles and court fights that had consumed her. The choice came slowly, like a delicate seedling pushing through hardened dirt. It would take enormous fortitude to ignore the voices in her head, the expectations of others, and possibly even the urgings of her heart, which still clung to the image of a complete family unit, as it should have been. However, the alternative, more bitterness, bickering, and pain for her children, was no longer viable. She thought about Sasha and their recent talk. Sasha too had been forced to face tough realities about herself, to admit her weaknesses, and to reconstruct her life piece by painful piece. Sasha's acceptance of her own past revealed a quiet strength, as did her vulnerability, which had allowed for genuine healing. Perhaps there was a lesson in that, a quiet strength in admitting flaws and choosing a path of healing over one of continuous strife. It was both humbling and liberating. Willow eventually made her decision as the sun dipped below the horizon, throwing deep shadows across Port Charles. It was not a huge, dramatic statement, but rather a quiet interior shift, a firm settling of her soul. She would not challenge the custody decision. She would accept it and devote all of her attention to developing a healthy, calm co-parenting relationship with Michael. She would prioritize her children's mental well-being over her own desire for control or the perceived need to win. It was a difficult, humbling decision, one that would definitely disappoint Drew and many of her supporters in the struggle, maybe leading to the end of her relationship with him. But for the first time in a long time, Willow felt a glimmer of genuine optimism, a sense of rightness that resonated deep within her soul, a serenity flowing over her that contrasted sharply with the fear that had become her regular companion. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about loving, actually loving, and making the best decision she could for the tiny lives who relied upon her. She picked up her phone, not to call her lawyer to prepare for fight, but to send Michael a short, simple text. "Can we talk? Just us. About the kids. No lawyers." It was a little move, but Willow saw it as a major step, a proclamation of peace. The road ahead would be difficult, needing continual communication, compromise, and an unrelenting devotion to her children's happiness, possibly even resulting in a new, more complicated relationship with Drew if he refused to accept her decision. But when she straightened her shoulders and exuded a quiet strength, Willow knew with full certainty that she was finally getting it right. The house's silence no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for the first strokes of a new, more tranquil beginning. This decision, she understood, was not only for her children, but also for herself. A step toward recovering the compassionate, morally grounded woman she aspired to be, breaking away from the pattern of wrong decisions. The week had been filled with disclosures, confrontations, and heartfelt conversations, all leading up to Willow's important moment. Port Charles, a swirling nexus of interwoven destinies, braced itself for the aftermath, the ripples of these personal earthquakes spreading throughout the town, rearranging relationships and carving new paths for its ever-changing population. The soap opera, as always, promised more drama, tears, and unexpected turns as the consequences of these very personal decisions began to play out, hitting everyone in their wake.